Did you hear I gave back your adapter to Margaret? I was a good girl.
Yeah, I have it in my pocket.
Thank you. The reason we invite everybody to come here is so people can learn about animals, build a connection with animals, and support conservation efforts for these species around the globe. Nothing ever comes before what's best for the animal. The animals always come first. As AZA zoos and aquariums, we don't exist to be well-run menageries. That's not why I do this. We have a higher purpose, and that higher purpose is the conservation of species in the wild. It all comes down to this. We need to provide the best care and welfare for the individual animals we keep. We must manage the species we keep sustainably for the future, and we must work to connect our animals and exhibits to species in the wild and use them to inspire and empower our visitors to support our efforts to save them. We have a huge responsibility, and we must deliver on it.
Thanks very much. Thanks, Natalie. I've been to the Explorers Club so many times to hear people speak. A lot of my friends that spoke here. This is the first time I've ever had the honor of speaking here myself, so I'm really pleased to be here. As that video showed you, I hope, it gives you a little snippet into how much zoos and aquariums have evolved over time, certainly since the Victorian era. And I'll get into it more, but we recently, we have trouble really explaining to people how we evolve, what the role of a modern zoo and aquarium is now in the 21st century. Because a lot of people still have memories from 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago when zoos and aquariums were very different. But the Bronx Zoo has always been, ever since its inception, has always been a place where people could come to see animals, to experience animals, the wonders of nature, to get an impression of the biodiversity, the vastness of species that occupy the globe with us. And when the zoo was first conceived in the 1890s, the people who thought about it were conservationists. The term didn't exist at the time, but they were conservationists. They were people, mostly men at the time, but who were hunters and concerned with the plight of species in the wild. And at that time, New York, was a great city, but it didn't have a great zoo. We had a menagerie at Central Park at the Arsenal, but it wasn't a zoo that the greatest city in the world deserved. And these people set out to create a space. Now, the only way that they could do that was move the zoo out of the city. They wanted to create this grand park with all this space where animals could be exhibited in natural groupings and natural settings so that they could live, breed, propagate as they would in the wild. They also wanted it to be a place for science and learning where people could come and learn about the animals. And it was a place for the preservation of species into the future, because then that's what they were concerned about. So they worked and they got the charter for the New York Zoological Society in 1895. And again, these people were hunters, conservationists, and they were concerned about the unregulated take of animals, right? The market trade was just taking animals, and they were worried that these species would not be sustained into the future for future generations. So you recognize maybe some of those people, two of them important to the club, or one especially. On the far right of that screen is William Hornaday. He's the first director of the Bronx Zoo, and of course the fellow next to him is Teddy Roosevelt. And Teddy Roosevelt at the time was the president of the Boone and Crockett Club, and the commission went to him to go to people in New York and Albany and say, we need a charter of this grand zoological park for the city of New York. And so Teddy, as you know, was an important figure in conservation, both for the New York Zoological Society and for the Explorers Club. Another guy who was really important was known as the father of Greater New York, Andrew Green. Green was influential in the development of Central Park, the Public Library, American Museum of Natural History, as well as the Bronx Zoo. He also served as the first president of the New York Zoological Society from 1895 to 1897. But Hornaday was really the most influential, impactful figure on the Bronx Zoo in the early days. Hornaday was a taxidermist by trade. He was also the person who designed the National Zoo, Smithsonian's National Zoo, and he was the first director of that institution before the board in New York hired him to come to New York. His first big charge was to select the site for the Bronx Zoo, and he had 4 different locations, 4 different sites to choose from: Van Cortlandt Park, Pelham Bay Park, Crotona Park, and Bronx Park South. And Hornaday chose Bronx Park South. And he did it for really obvious reasons. It was the characteristics of the park, the natural attributes that the park had. If you look at the aerial photograph and the map of the zoo at the time, you see New York's only freshwater river runs through the grounds of the Bronx Zoo. That's the Bronx River. And we're in the middle of this old hardwood forest, and we have this tremendous glacial rock deposits that run throughout. And all this led to the characteristics that he wanted to see in naturalistic exhibits. The park was beautiful, the parkland was beautiful, and it's easy to see why he chose it right across the street, Fordham Road, from the Botanical Garden. This exhibit, every time I'm in the zoo and I look at this zoo, and every time I take people on a tour of the zoo, I always stop. This is the Père David deer exhibit at the Bronx Zoo. It's just opposite Tiger Mountain. And this, more than any exhibit at the zoo, to me, exemplifies why Hornaday picked this site. You see the water element, the trees, the rock work, and it's an exhibit of a couple of acres, and it's a space where these deer can live in a large group as they would in the wild, and breed and reproduce. This is the vision that Hornaday had for the Bronx Zoo when he picked Bronx Park South as the site. The other cool thing about the Bronx Zoo is because it's so big, now it's 265 acres, there's always a place where you can go, a quiet place, back then and even today, where you can just kind of sit, find a quiet spot, and commune with nature. And now, I mean, that's more important than it was in 1900, right? Because the world is so hectic, the world is so busy. People long for places where they can come and be surrounded by a soft, green environment and just kind of escape the hecticness of the day. So after the park was charted and the site was chosen, we had to start building the buildings. I like this photograph. Not too many of these photographs exist, but this is the building of the reptile house, and you can see the exterior there. This building was actually the first building that was built in the park and operational. It was operational actually a year before the park opened in 1898. The park opened in 1899. And it's the only building that we have that still exists and is performing in its original capacity as the home for the reptile and amphibian collection at the Bronx Zoo. This is the invitation for the Bronx Zoo, 1898. You know, if we were doing it today, we wouldn't open a grand exhibit, or certainly we wouldn't open the zoo in November. We would wait until the spring, till nicer. But I guess they were very, very anxious. And it was a kind of cold, dreary day, but they got a lot of people to come. We had 848 animals and some exhibits, but people were really happy to get to the Bronx Zoo to see the creation that Hornaday had come up with. And since its earliest days, it has been a place where people come to look at animals. It inspires them. It's a place of wonder and awe when they can see things that they didn't even know exist. And this is certainly true in Victorian times, but it's true now too. We introduce people who are cut off to nature to all the different species that exist in this world. I hear all the time from people that come to the Bronx Zoo, wow, I didn't even know that those exist. In the beginning, when we were getting animals, one of the biggest challenges that they had was, one, acquiring animals, because back then all the animals came from the wild. Right now, the vast majority, 90, I don't know what the figure is, but it's over 90% of the animals that we have in zoos come from other zoos, right? There's propagation programs, but in the beginning, the animals were taken from the wild. And one of the challenges after the animals actually came to the zoo was figuring out a way to keep them alive. We didn't know anything about their behavior, what they ate, whatever. So there was a lot of trial and error and a lot of science and experimentation that went into keeping animals alive, and then eventually to keeping them properly. So these are just some neat old photographs. Certainly reptiles are a perfect example, right? We know today that most reptile species are pretty easy to keep alive and healthy as long as you meet certain environmental parameters. But back then, as crazy as it sounds, they didn't know that. They had to learn that. So, reptiles aren't capable of maintaining their own body temperature, so they rely on external sources to stay warm enough for their metabolisms to run. So a lot of effort in the beginning was getting individual animals to thrive. And you can see the sea lions there taking a romp outside their exhibit. And then there's a big reticulated python the reptile department is measuring or stretching out somewhere. And then I just include this picture because this is a well-known resident of the Bronx Zoo. His name was Senor Lopez, and he's been subject of portraits and also sculptures. And I put it in here mainly because not only did Hornaday want the Bronx Zoo to be a great zoological center, he wanted it to be a place for learning, people to study and appreciate animals. He wanted to invite artists, sculptors in to really do in-depth studies of animals so they could appreciate animals. And a lot of the early works were done by people who came to the park, actually observed animals on exhibit, and created tremendous artwork.
I have that Senor Lopez right here. Oh, the bronze that Anna made in 1906.
Cool. And of course the stone sculptures adorn the gardens right outside the administration building by Fountain Circle in the Bronx Zoo right now. So keeping the animals alive, as I said, was trial and error. This guy's name was Rudy Bell, and he was the first manager of the commissary. Now, believe it or not, it's a lot more complicated now. It looks different. There's a lot more foodstuffs, but this is pretty much the way we do it now. So there's a centralized commissary where all the foodstuffs come in, and then it's transported, not by carts anymore, but it's transported to the different exhibits where the keepers that work in those areas will put the finishing touches on the diet and then offer it to the animals. So you can see this guy here is feeding capybaras. I don't know what he's feeding them, but he's feeding capybaras. And this photograph, this is Dinah, and I think the chimp is Baldy, but I'm not sure. But Dinah was the first gorilla that came to the Bronx Zoo. And, I said the challenge was keeping a lot of these species alive. It was really hard with primates, especially the great apes, because they're so closely related to us, and we knew nothing about them. People thought that gorillas ate meat, that they were carnivores. They didn't know that they were vegetarians. Hornaday would be frustrated because they didn't thrive on a diet of, meat and potatoes like people did. So Hornaday actually got so frustrated, it said, there's no way that any zoological park will ever be able to exhibit an adult gorilla in any zoo. And of course, again, through advances in husbandry, through nutrition and veterinary care, that thankfully did not come true. And, we've had thriving population of gorillas in the Bronx Zoo since the mid-50s, bred so many, and the lowland gorillas are well represented in zoos around the country. Another thing I just should say is zoonotic diseases. People were not cognizant of how easily diseases from people, like tuberculosis was rampant, could be transferred to these animals. So it was all learning curve in the beginning. This is the grand entrance. I like this because there's not, in my opinion, there's not another zoo in the country, maybe not another zoo in the world that has an entrance like this. This is Fountain Circle. You can see it was designed so the horses and carriages could come in. If you go there today, you can, the watering troughs for the horses are still there at the base of the wall. And it's just a magnificent space. My office is in that big building on the left side of the screen, and every time I can sneak out of a Zoom call or Zoom meeting, I just go out there, and it's one of my favorite places, even though there's not any animals right there. That's where Senor Lopez is right now, and just the garden, the fountain, everything is breathtaking, so it's one of my favorite spots. I came in to the lobby downstairs, and I saw there's like a plaque down there with a series of firsts. So the Bronx Zoo has a series of firsts, too. We didn't list all of them, but some of them. We had the first full-time zoo veterinarian at the Bronx Zoo in 1901. His name was Reed Blair. And Reed Blair actually became the second director of the Bronx Zoo after Hornaday retired. We also had the first education department in a zoological park in 1929. But there were other firsts, too. I told you Hornaday was a taxidermist, a conservationist, right? He not only worked with the animals in the zoo, setting up the animals at the zoo, demanding that the animals at the zoo be well kept, but he was also concerned about populations, as the founders of the organization had been. And Hornaday was very influential and worked to get the Fur Seal Treaty of 1911 signed between the U.S., Great Britain, Japan, and Russia. And this was because these animals were being depleted for their skins. So Hornaday, even though he was a zoo man, was out there concerned about sustaining wild animal populations for the future, and probably most notably the American bison. When Hornaday was a taxidermist, he went out to collect bison for a diorama, and he was shocked that there were no bison. And there were no bison because there was this just slaughter of these animals that increased, especially after the railroads. At one time they thought there were maybe 50, 60 million of these animals on the western plains, but it's estimated that, there are about 15 million left around the time of the Civil War, 1867. And then 200 years later, there were less than 1,000. So Hornaday worked really hard to go out and collect as many bison as he could, not from the wild, but from ranchers that had them, and then brought them back to the zoo and established the American Bison Society. And this was basically an organization determined to save the bison from extinction. And the first meeting happened at the Bronx Zoo in the old Lion House, and there's still a plaque on the south end of the building right now that commemorates that meeting. I always like this picture. I worked with Pat Thomas for years, general curator and curator of mammals, and every time we look at this, we just don't understand how that wire cage held a bison. But it looks like it did. So in 1907, the Bronx Zoo sent the first group of bison that were born at the Bronx Zoo back to the Western Plains to try to repatriate that herd. And you can see, here's some of those animals making the trip by horse-drawn wagon. And the neat thing is that I mentioned Pat Thomas. Pat Thomas was passionate about bison and worked for the last 10 or 12 years of his career at the zoo trying to get this program back up and running, establish a purebred group of bison at the Bronx Zoo, and then continue that relationship we have with the First Nation, where we send purebred bison from the Bronx Zoo back out west every year to help sustain their herds and provide genetic diversity. I said, well, what's so hard about that? Again, with advancements in science and testing, the animals that we thought were pure bison turned out not to be. They were hybridized with cattle. They had some cattle genes in there. So as the testing improved, we got to be way, way more selective about what we considered purebred bison. And now I think we have about 40 purebred bison in a breeding herd at the Bronx Zoo, and again, mainly to Pat's credit. And again, we send those animals out to the plains every year, which is just a nice story, which continues from 1900 into today. So I think what you get a little bit, hopefully, from these slides I'm showing you is when you work in a zoo, zoo professionals have two main responsibilities, right? We have a responsibility to individual animals to give them the best care possible, but we also have a responsibility to sustaining species. So we work for the individual animal and we work for the health of the species so that these species will be here for future generations. And it's not just for future generations to look at. You know, I tell this to people all the time because people say, well, you know, but what what good is it if they just live in the zoo? And I always say that what zoos and aquariums do is we preserve options for the future. We don't know what the future is going to bring, right? There's habitat destruction, rampant habitat destruction. Species are dying in the wild. There's a negative impact from human activity on a lot of different species. We don't know what's going to happen in the future. We don't know what we're going to be able to restore. But if we still have assurance populations of some animals, of some species in our parks, we might have the option in the future to restore these animals to their home ranges, to the places where they belong. So that's why zoos and aquariums are important. That's why the assurance colonies are important, because they are preserving options for the future. This is some species that we work with. This is a gharial, which is a really neat crocodilian. They live in India. They're highly endangered. They're persecuted by fishermen because they eat fish. They have a slender snout, and sometimes they're hunted or killed on purpose. Sometimes they're caught up in nets and they drowned. So when Jungle World opened in 1985, we had gharial there. We went for a little bit without them. We just brought them back in 2016. And we also fully support this guy, Dr. Jeff Lang's work, who does critical conservation work with this species in India. We work with a lot of different species, but this is one that I was involved with from the beginning. In 2000, the Tanzania government built a dam, a hydroelectric plant that changed the course of a waterfall. And the waterfall used to come crashing down into this gorge, the Kahansi Spray Gorge. And when the water came down, it created this microenvironment with this heavy mist. And this one little species of toads, the Kahansi spray toads, lived in that area. Well, when they changed that environment, the toads started to die out. And the government of Tanzania knew WCS, knew the Bronx Zoo, and our work with species both in situ, ex situ, and they asked us to come to Tanzania and collect as many toads as we could and set up an assurance colony back at the Bronx Zoo. So we did. And we sent keepers from the reptile house, and they collected 499 animals, not 500, 499 animals. They couldn't find that last toad. I'm sure he was there, but they couldn't find him. And what we did was we partnered with other zoos, but mainly the Toledo Zoo. And because we didn't want to keep all the toads, you know, all the 499 toads in the world in one place. We wanted to separate them, keep some in the Toledo Zoo. And we worked hard, like they did in the early days of the zoo, to establish appropriate habitats, the appropriate parameters that we needed to keep them alive, to keep them healthy, and eventually to breed them. And the cool thing about amphibians and some reptiles is this is one room in our amphibian propagation centers. You can see how many tanks and terrariums on there. There's thousands of toads in there. And this is just one room at the Bronx Zoo. So, I mean, because of their size, because of the way they reproduce, because of how many offspring they have, they were an easy species to work with as soon as we figured out the husbandry protocols. And we were eventually, together with the Toledo Zoo, able to send tens of thousands of zoo-bred Kahansi spray toads back to Tanzania, do soft releases, and then, of course, I left an important thing out. The Tanzania government restored the habitat in the gorge so that the toads could survive. So they set up complicated, massive irrigation systems so that the toads could survive. And this was the first example of an amphibian species that was declared distinct in the wild, that was restored because of the efforts of zoos and zoo-bred animals being put back out there. And I was really proud of that. And one other thing I'll tell you is, you look at that room. We did a story with National Geographic one time, and the writer and the photographer came, and we went and we opened that room. And the previous slide, you heard there was that one little audio of that little frog calling. Imagine that times 1,000. And you opened this room, right, and you could hear this deafening chorus of all these little male toads calling in here, looking for mates. And it struck me on a visceral level, that there were only 2 places in the world that you could hear that. In New York, in the Bronx, and in Toledo. But you couldn't hear it in Tanzania because they didn't exist in Tanzania anymore. Now you can hear it in Tanzania because of the effort of the Bronx Zoo. And so, you know, this guy, there's a tremendous amount of people that contributed to everything that the Bronx Zoo's been able to accomplish. And one of these guys that was there from the beginning is William Beebe, and he's also well known to the Explorers Club. He was the first curator of birds, curator of ornithology at the Bronx Zoo. And you guys here give an award, I understand, every 4 years, the Beebe Award for excellence in marine exploration. Well, not only was he the curator of birds, but he felt very passionately that if you're going to keep animals in zoos, you need to understand how they live in the wild. So Beebe fought Hornaday tooth and nail so he could spend as much time in the field as he could learning about how the birds lived in the wild, learn their natural history so he could duplicate that, replicate that at the zoo so that the animals could live good lives and be encouraged to breed and propagate. Now, you also probably know Beebe from the bathysphere. So you might recognize that flag next to Beebe. That's your flag, the Explorers Club flag. And the flag on the top is a flag that Beebe created for the Department of Tropical Research that he founded. Now, Beebe is on the left side of your screen. The other fellow is Barton, Otis Barton. Now, these 2 guys, I mean, they're not heavy set, but they're over 6 foot tall. Both of these guys climbed into the 6-foot ball of steel and went down into the ocean depths to try to explore and learn about species that no one had ever seen. And, not to be coarse, I understand Barton was a puker. So imagine being Beebe and Barton, you know, thousands of feet under the water, and Barton barfed. And anyway, I mean, I know there's certain things that just stick with me. That is not something I would have enjoyed. Anyway, Beebe was really an exceptional guy because he was a zoo person, he was an ornithologist, but he had the ability to write both scientifically and popular works for people. He wrote so many books for people to read, and this allowed the general public to go on these explorations with him. I mean, they could go to these places that they would never go. They could go and see pheasants. He did the monograph on pheasants. He traveled all across Asia. He was in South America. Beebe was a very popular figure in his day, so popular that Walt Disney actually reached out to him, wrote to him and said, hey, listen, you know, if you're ever on the West Coast, we'd like to come, you know, we'd like to show you some of the things that we're doing out here with animation. Beebe was also one of the first people that I think made the connection between birds being direct descendants of dinosaurs. And he was also ahead of his time because he had a varied group of people that worked with him. He didn't just work with men, but he brought a team that consisted of women who were both artists and writers, and they worked on the ships with him and in the tropical research station. And the coolest thing is when he was in the bathysphere with Barton, they couldn't take pictures. So they would describe what they saw over microphones, and the people that were on the surface then would try to draw what they could see so they could illustrate these species for the first time. And countless pieces of artwork came out of not only the ships, but also the Department of Tropical Research. And a lot of these pieces are hanging in the office buildings in the Bronx Zoo. Another guy in the early day was Lee Crandall. Lee Crandall was probably the best known zoo person, zoo professional in the country. He started out as BB's assistant curator and then ended up as general curator. And he wrote several books also, but his most important one was probably the management of captive wild mammals, management of wild animals in captivity, which was known as the Zooman's Bible at the time. And believe it or not, even though it was written in 1964, we do go back to it for certain things like weights and heights and longevity information. So he was a giant in the field, as well as Ditmars. Ditmars was the first curator of reptiles, and he was an amateur herpetologist. So when Hornaday hired him as a herpetologist, he brought all the reptiles and amphibians that he would keep in his apartment into the reptile department, and that formed the basis of our collection. And he also, you know, he did films on how snakes moved. He put them on glass and shot video from the bottom. He also authored many popular books that people read, and it did a lot to help the image that reptiles and amphibians have, which is sometimes negative, but it did a lot to help their image with the general public. But probably the most influential person in the 20th century in zoos was Bill Conway. And Bill Conway came to the zoo in 1956 as an assistant curator of birds and became the director in 1962. And I knew Conway. I started working at the zoo in '73 when I was 14 years old, and that's when I met Conway. And the zoo was a much smaller place at that time, so I actually had a relationship with him from those early days. And he was visionary. I mean, he did not accept status quo. He dreamed about what could be, wouldn't it be great if, why can't we do this? And also followed in the train of, you know, we need to understand the animal's natural history, and we need to build exhibits that support that, allow the animals to be comfortable and display, you know, all the natural behaviors that they would in the wild. In addition to that, Conway had two mantras. If you're going to keep animals, keep them well. And the other thing was zoos had to be agents of conservation. And those are two mantras that certainly I live by today and people at the Bronx Zoo live by today. He was most associated with birds in the early days. And when he came to the zoo, the most innovative thing was the African Plains exhibit, which was the first predator-prey exhibit in the country. Now, Hornaday, the first director, he did not like this style of exhibitry. He didn't, for some reason, you know, Hagenbeck had been doing this for years in Germany. Hornaday didn't like it. We had to wait till Hornaday retired, and then Reed Blair came in and said, yeah, let's give it a shot. And this was the first exhibit that showed predators and prey living seemingly in the same space. So honestly, I don't have a good photograph that depicts that, but if you come to the zoo today, you'll see lions on Lion Island, you'll see the Thompson's gazelle and lesser kudu behind them, and then to the left you'll see these really elegant African antelope called Nyala. And people are still amazed. They don't understand how do the lions not eat the Nyala? Well, because there's a series of dry moats that keep them apart. But in 1941, you know, this was revolutionary. And again, you know, I do a lot of tours at the Bronx Zoo, and I take people to this area. They're amazed to find out that this exhibit is as old as it is. Okay, they think that this is a new development because you don't see any obvious barriers. So obvious barriers, Conway wanted to do the same thing with birds. Again, going back to understanding natural history. He had ideas for a grand bird exhibit, okay, but he wanted to try them out on an existing exhibit at the zoo, which was the aquatic birdhouse. So this isn't the best photograph, but it illustrates the idea. People were used to seeing birds in cages, birds behind wire, whatever. They came into the newly renovated aquatic birdhouse, and there was no wire. The birds were there, the people were here. So how is that possible? What keeps the birds in? Well, again, it was this incorporation of knowledge of the natural behavior of the birds. If you look, even in this really simple photograph, the light side, that's where the birds are. There's the water element, the sand element, there's green, it's soft, it's furnished, there's perching, there's skylights. That's what the bird wants. If you look where the people are, it's dark, it's sterile, there's nothing there to attract the birds. Conway he used this kind of knowledge to design exhibits to build really innovative stuff. And the aquatic birdhouse, the predecessor to the World of Birds, is still, a vibrant, vital place now where we have colonies of roseate spoonbills and other birds that breed in there, again, because of the design of the building. This is the old bear dens, very, very stark, very sterile, wire, bent over. This is the new bear dens, again, with a moated structure. So again, you're not very aware of what's keeping the bears in. But also notice, going back to Hornaday, that's all natural rock. That's that glacial rock. And this is what Hornaday envisioned when he was talking about naturalistic exhibits in the Bronx Zoo. And so we're using the natural characteristics of the park to enhance these exhibits. This is an early planning session for the World of Darkness. The fellow on the right, I believe, is Joe Davis, who was an assistant curator of mammals, and Conway's next to him. And this is an early mock-up for that building. The World of Darkness was another incredibly revolutionary, innovative building at the time, right? They designed this whole thing, but before this building, you couldn't display nocturnal animals because nocturnal animals sleep in the daytime. So it'd be very frustrating for somebody to kind of see it. So they came up with a very simple idea. They came up with a really simple idea. Reverse the light cycles. Turn the lights on at night, flood the exhibits with light at night, make the animals think the night is day, and then in the daytime when the people are there, you have it dimly lit so the animals come out and they're active. And that's how people who came to the Bronx Zoo in 1969 got to see things like vampire bats, other species of bats, caiman, all these other nocturnal species, duraculi, which are one of the few, probably the only nocturnal monkeys. It was a revolutionary exhibit. And we closed the World of Darkness in 2008 just because it needed renovation. But the good news is we are planning to reopen it next year, and it's going to be true to its original mission, where it's just a really neat exhibit dedicated to exhibiting nocturnal species that people would, maybe not even know exist, but otherwise never be able to see in their natural settings doing what they do at nighttime. So I mentioned the World of Birds. The World of Birds was 33,000 square feet of exhibit space. Okay, it's a huge building, and the genius is that there's two levels to it. So you go through the bottom of it, you see the forest floor. You go to the second level, and you see the canopies. So you see the species that live in the forest on the forest floor on the first level, and when you go upstairs, you see the species that live in the canopies. And this was the first time that people were really brought into the same space as animals. And you can see, this is what it looked like in '72 when it opened, and people were blown away by this space, this immersion exhibit where they were in the same space with animals. And again, because we incorporated the natural history of birds into the exhibit. This is a photo of the beet eaters we took in 2002, which was when the building celebrated its 50-year anniversary. And it still holds up today. I mean, we close it once a year, we revamp the plantings, we do this and that, but this building is still a standard when it comes to exhibiting the diversity of birds in the world. Children's Zoo. Children's Zoo opened in 1941. It had a nursery rhyme theme. It really didn't teach children anything. So this was the first, I started in '73, but I graduated college in '81, and this is the first exhibit that I really was involved in the design on. And the idea was we're going to increase the size of the children's zoo. It's about 3.5 acres. And we weren't going to have like simplistic exhibits for kids, but we were going to build naturalistic exhibits for kids that had wild animals, that allowed them to get up close to the animals, to observe them, to learn from them, and even kind of mimic some of the behaviors that the animals have. Like this. If you've ever been there, this is the desert exhibit where you have fennec foxes, and the theme here is senses, so it's hearing, right? So we want to illustrate the kids, you know, why do they have such big ears? Well, those big ears help the fox to hear. So we have child-sized fennec fox ears that they can go in and hear sounds amplified, and it gives them a chance just to understand animal adaptations a little better. This is the prairie dogs and homes. And then, even though that was innovative, we decided it was still really important to keep the farmyard, the domestic area, because so many of the kids that come to the Bronx Zoo don't have experiences, you know, with animals. And to them, goats, llamas, alpacas are as exotic as zebras are. So the domestic area where they get to pet and feed domestic animals is still really an important learning experience for kids. From there, with Conway, we moved on to Jungle World, which this didn't exhibit one taxa of birds like the world of animals like the world of birds, but it exhibited a slice of an Asian rainforest. And what I really like about Jungle World is it's totally indoors. And so whether you come to the zoo on January 1st or July 1st, you get the same experience. It's just spectacular. It's totally immersive. You're walking through a rainforest. You're seeing the plants. It's lush, and you're seeing all these species that live in these intact areas in nature. So there's gallery exhibits like this that exhibit the Rhode Island snake-necked turtles, but there's also these massive exhibits like Gharial River. Remember I talked about gharials before, so you can see some of those crocodilians there. And in this area, there's free-ranging fruit bats, there's gibbons that are there, other species of birds. So if you spend time in Jungle World, it's not just an exhibit where you can see one type of animal, it's an exhibit where you can see a slice of nature and everybody that lives there. And then Conway's crowning achievement probably was Congo Gorilla Forest, which opened in 1999, which is the year he retired. And as I said, two mantras, right? Keep animals well, but zoos have to be agents of conservation. So this is the first major zoo exhibit anywhere that we're aware of that tied a person's visit to the zoo to an act of conservation in the field. And what happened was you go through this exhibit and you visit and you see all these different species that live there, and you learn about all these different field projects that WCS did in Africa, in the Congo, and you could choose where you wanted your admission fee to go to support. And since we did this, I mean, I'm not a numbers guy, but since we did it, I think it's about $18 million of support have gone to conservation projects in Central Africa because of this exhibit in the Bronx Zoo. And imagine the impact that that can have, right? Imagine the impact if every zoo in every city in every country had one exhibit that did the same thing. Imagine what we could do for field conservation. But again, Conway felt very strongly, as we all do now, that zoos need to be agents of conservation. And when Conway was gone, we continued. You know, he was our mentor. We continued with what we learned. We built Tiger Mountain, where we brought the public really close to these apex predators. And it's this type of experience where you actually get there, you get to see these animals and look in their eyes, and you realize that, you know, you're dealing with another sentient being. You appreciate them in a different way. People say, well, you know, do you need zoos? We always get this, are zoos relevant? We don't need zoos. You can watch TV. You don't really need to go there to see animals, whatever. Nothing compares to that. And the other thing that I really don't like is when people say, well, you can go and see animals in nature. Well, we have about 4 million people who come to our parks in the city of New York, right? Four out of our 5 parks are located in really underserved areas. The majority of people that come to the Bronx Zoo to see animals, to see the wonder of nature, right, that we want to inspire, that we want to get to join us in our conservation mission, they will never have the opportunity to see those animals in the wild. They just don't have the resources to do that. The zoo is the only connection they have to nature. It's the only window they have to this wildlife. That's why zoos are still relevant. And then we did Madagascar, which was in the carnivore house, the old big cat house. And we try to pick now when we do major exhibits, we try to pick areas where we work and species that we work with. And WCS is longstanding work on the island of Madagascar, which is really unique because the species that live on Madagascar are basically endemic to that island and don't live anywhere else. So especially our herpetology department, our reptile department, worked a lot with radiated tortoises, plowshare tortoises, fat-tailed tortoises, and whatever. So we built this exhibit to illustrate some of the work that we did in this island nation. And again, Conway made the connection between zoos and conservation. Like Beebe, he was out in the field. He studied wild populations of birds, flamingos, penguins, Patagonia, South America for over 40 years. He worked to make sure, remember the mantra, keep animals well? He worked to make sure that the zoos were on track, that they were held to a standard. One, we're not just keeping animals right, we're working to sustain populations for the future. So with the AZA, the Association of Zoos in America, WCS and the Bronx Zoo was leaders in establishing the SSPs, which is species survival plans. Basically, we manage many species in zoos the same way people manage purebred dogs or racehorses. There's a stud book. Scientists look at them and say, who would be a good match? What do we need to improve genetic diversity? And so Conway and WCS were crucial in establishing the SSP program in AZA zoos, which led to a sustainability of and healthy populations of many species, especially those that are endangered and threatened. He also felt very strongly that there need to be tough standards. We need to be held to really high standards. And there was an accreditation process that we put in place that he led, which basically AZA is the gold standard of zoo and aquarium accreditation. And the Bronx Zoo and the aquarium just went through accreditation in July, and we went to the hearing in September in Calgary, and of course we passed, but the city's zoos will be up for accreditation next year. So that's a process we go through every year. So, you know, the higher purpose, right? We, despite all this, I think we were not very good at communicating to people what we did or how well we did it. People didn't know what zoos were. They didn't know we're relevant. They don't know whatever. And it was really frustrating because we didn't have a platform. We didn't have a mechanism to let people know how zoos evolved, how we're still relevant. And, you know, my wife Kathleen and I were married 27 years. You know, we used to have Thanksgiving, and a young nephew would come over, and he'd hear this story about the zoos and what we do and our frustration. He was involved. He had this, you know, kind of peek behind the curtain. Well, eventually that kid grew up and he became an accomplished documentary film producer. And he came to me one time and said, you know, you need to do a reality show. So, you know, I think reality show, I'm thinking Kardashian. So I'm like, I really don't want to do a reality show, right? So he said, well, you know, it's a docu, whatever. So long and short of it is, you know, because he had the inside scoop, because he had that look behind the curtain, and because he understood our frustration in not being able to get our story out there, he basically talked us in to doing this program, this series on Animal Planet, this docu-series. And it really was a game changer. It changed the narrative. It changed the narrative on zoos and aquariums around the country and around the world. And when we were in negotiation with Animal Planet, you know, Animal Planet wanted to use the Bronx Zoo in the title because I wanted to sell it. And we fought really hard to keep it generic. I did not want to call the Bronx Zoo. I wanted to call the zoo because I wanted any zoo, any AZA zoo around the country to be able to say to the people who come there, people watch it, say, well, you know, this didn't happen here, but we do the same thing. This is what all AZA zoos do. So if I can, I'm going to play the trailer. If you ask a child to draw a picture of a zoo, chances are they're going to draw an animal behind bars. We got to take that image and change it.
Really?
We've never done anything like this. The general public would never get the access you're going to get, which is to see what goes on behind the scenes every day.
Hey, Mama.
I really enjoy this. It strengthens the bond that we have with these guys.
Hi. If I could have any job in the world, hello, I'd be a gorilla keeper in the Bronx Zoo. Hey, buddy.
That's two amazing things here.
Yeah, he's just a little uncertain about all this stuff.
There she goes. It's one of those city tortoises.
I grew up in the Bronx, actually on the other side of the fence here.
Hey, guys. How are you doing?
I like people, but if I had my choice, I would prefer to hang out with penguins all day.
I want to hug you. For animals that need a home, we're their home. Good boy. That was really cute.
This is the flamingo spa treatment.
I love you.
Bye, lady.
All our effort, everything we do every day is for the animals. It's not enough to keep animals in exhibits just for people to look at. There has to be a higher purpose. And for us, it's conservation of species in the wild.
That's how we do it here in the Boogie Down Bronx.
And you know, we were a little apprehensive when we first did that because nothing had been done like that. Nothing had brought people behind the scenes. And the deal we made with our producers with Animal Planet was they were going to get unfettered access. You know, they were going to get to put on what they wanted as long as they represented us fairly. And we had a great relationship with the producers with Animal Planet. I think they treated us really fairly. And that program, which is still running, we're not doing original episodes anymore, but really, really changed the narrative on zoos and aquariums. And I should say, Dave LaMattina, that's our nephew. He's in the front row right here. He always comes out to support us. And it's not just him, his partner Chad, his production company, Copperpot, but they... It is safe to say that series would not have happened without him. And looking back, you know, we are very appreciative of his determination and his ability to coax and cajole me into doing it. But you know, despite that, we still have issues. Some of you might see in the press lately. You know, there's been stories about our one elephant, Happy. We have two elephants, Happy and Patty. They don't live together, but they live adjacently. They talk to each other. They can touch each other. And they know they're there, whatever, but they just don't get along. And you know, for some reason, which we didn't know why, but like a couple of weeks ago, a month ago, whatever, Happy decided she wanted to go out on exhibit. She did not want to go out on exhibit. So one thing that is big in zoos now is, we kind of like let animals make up their mind, choice and control. You know, they want to do something, we don't force them to do that. So Patty went out, Happy didn't go out. And people just started to say all kinds of crazy things like there was something wrong with Happy and whatever, and there wasn't. And, you know, it just brought me back to the old days where I'm talking to the press and saying, no, she's fine, she's not choosing to go out. But people, for some reason, just didn't want to believe it. And then, you know, we had people who would ride the monorail and she's not out again today, or she was laying down. They took one photograph of her laying down, and I was like, yeah, of course she's laying down, because if you look at what we do is, you see that big old giant pile of sand right there? So as enrichment for some of these species, not just the elephant, but for bison, for other animals, you know, we'll put a big old pile of sand there, and they like to lay in it. So there wasn't anything wrong with it. She was choosing to do that and take advantage of some of the stuff we were putting out there to stimulate her. And I took this video just the other day where, you know, Happy's fine. And you can see she's out there because she decided she wanted to go out there again now, and the monorail is going to pass in a little bit. But it just kind of goes back to what I'm saying about, you know, working with individual animals, especially animals as smart as elephants. They have individual personalities. We respect those individual personalities, and, you know, we kind of let her do what she wants. So people sometimes get upset because they have like a boilerplate natural history of how animals should behave, but anybody who's ever had a pet knows that animals have individual personalities, and I'm often confused at why some people just refuse to understand that or can't understand that. Some of the crazy things that happen, I have to tell this story because I get requests for the stories a lot. I know we're running a little late, but I worked in the zoos a long time. People always ask me, you know, what's your favorite animal? I used to struggle, right? It's like, oh, you know, I like crocodilians, like tigers, like camels, like this, whatever. But the truth is, if you told me for the rest of my life I could only come in contact with one species, with one type of animal, my answer was very simple. It's a dog, right? I mean, I love dogs, and if I could only come in contact with one animal, it would be dog. So, you know, a couple of years ago, I mean, I lose track of the time, says 2003, we said, you know, listen, why don't we do something at the zoo about, you know, responsible pet ownership. We'll get some people from shelters to come in. We'll have adoption vans. It'll be nice. We'll do an event at the zoo. So, yeah, okay, great. So I like the dogs, so I went to the zoo on Saturday. I said to Kath, I'm going to go. I want to see some of the dogs, puppies and kittens, whatever. So I get there. I'm looking at the vans, and I see our PR person at the time. She's on the phone. She's very animated. I'm like, Linda, what are you doing? She's like, oh, I'm on the phone with the cops, you know, with the PD. I said, what's the matter? She said, there's a tiger in an apartment in Harlem. I said, there can't be. She goes, no, it is. They've been calling since yesterday, and they want us to come and help them. I said, it can't be a tiger. I mean, maybe it's tiger cub, maybe it's a serval, maybe it's whatever. I don't know what it is. So you can't put yourself out there as the expert in wildlife and then not, you know, we're always good partners with everybody. We're partners with NYPD, we partner with DEC, we partner with Fish and Wildlife. You know, they needed help, so we went. Myself and two veterinarians, Bob Cook and Bonnie Raphael. Oh, I'm sorry, I should have shown the picture of the little dog. And we went down to the projects, the Adam Clayton Powell projects, right? Drew Hamilton houses. And, you know, we didn't have, you know, whatever, cell phones or Waze or whatever, so we're driving down there and we're talking to the cops, and my friend Bob is like, okay, well, you know, we're on this street and whatever the case. He goes, where are you? He goes, well, we're here. He goes, well, just make the next left, you'll see us. So we drive along, we make the next left, and we turn, we see this apartment building, and there's like hundreds, if not thousands of people in the street in front of this apartment building. And we pull up in front with a van that says Bronx Zoo on it, right? So we get out of the car, and it's like the old Ghostbusters movie. We get out of the car, and the crowd in unison starts chanting, zoo, 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 zoo. So we go into the building. I think it was the 5th floor. It doesn't really matter. I think it's the 5th floor. And you know, if you know anything about the police, when it's serious, there's a lot of white shirts there because the white shirts are the upper management. So they were all white shirts. They were serious-looking white shirts, and there wasn't nobody smiling. It was like white shirts. And Ray Kelly was there, police commissioner. So they take us to this apartment down below where this tiger lives, or supposed to live. And it's so crazy. It's a Saturday morning, family's eating dinner, eating breakfast, having cereal, watching cartoons. We go through, hey, how you doing? We go in there, we go to the window, and the cops put a camera on a stick, and they hold it up, and we're watching the monitor, and all of a sudden, this tiger sits up. And we just see the back of his head. You can see his ears and the white spots on the back of his head, and we're like, oh my God, there's a tiger in there. So luckily we had 2 vets, and our veterinarians obviously are experienced with tranquilizers and drug cocktails, whatever, to safely anesthetize animals. So we made a drug, a DART, and ESU, Emergency Service Police Officer, his name was Marty Duffy, he propelled down from 2 floors above. And this video was picture was on the front page of the Daily News. This is after he shot the tiger. The window closed, and the tiger reacted badly to being darted. So imagine Marty hanging on the side of the building with this tiger pounding on the window, protesting the fact that he was darted. So we got the tiger out of the apartment. It was he was a full-grown tiger. I don't know, it was about 400 pounds, I think. We did a quick, well, I should tell you that the tiger was living in this apartment. There's a lot of rooms in the apartment. There was nobody in there with him at the time. So imagine your house if someone picked it up and shook it, because there was stuff all over the place because the tiger was living in there. And so when the tiger was anesthetized, he went to the corner of a room and went to sleep. So Bob Cook and I, the chief vet, and I went in there, and he had a syringe with some more drugs to make sure the tiger stayed asleep. And I had this pole, and we kind of creeped up on him, and I poked him with the pole once. He didn't move. I poked him again. He didn't move. So we jumped him, and we gave him some more drugs, and we got him out successfully. And, he was fine, and he went to a sanctuary, and he lived out the rest of his life there. But this is just a little video. I won't play it all, but, I mean, this is everybody and their mother is here when we have this tiger in the hallway of this apartment. You can get some idea of how big he is, and this is us loading it into the crate. And I say, well, where are you? Where are you in this video? Well, if you look at the picture where you show the tiger going into the crate, you could look. There's somebody in the crate, and you can see there's an arm with a bracelet. That was me in the crate. So we pulled the tiger into the crate, and then I climbed out over the tiger to get out of the crate, and then we took him to the sanctuary. So that was one of the craziest things, and I apologize, but I got to finish this story. So. We get the tiger out of the apartment. We get him in the elevator. He's on a gurney. There's 2 emergency services cops. There's me, Bob, and Bonnie Raphael, the vets. And one of the cops hits the button on the elevator that says lobby. So the elevator promptly goes up to the top floor on the building, and it stops on every floor, right? And there are people, it's a Saturday morning, life goes on, right? There are people with laundry baskets, shopping carts, strollers, and it's New York. So they are annoyed that they can't get into the elevator with me, Bob, Bonnie, the tiger, and the 2 emergency services people. And it literally stopped on every floor on the way down, and we went through that experience. So it was one of the most memorable, and it doesn't, that's just not a once in a lifetime deal. This happened a couple of years ago. I lose track of time, but this was a couple of years ago when someone in one of the boroughs had this mountain lion, and DEC asked us to help, and we went and got the cat and provided a temporary home for him before it was. I think he went to a sanctuary or I can't remember where he went, a sanctuary where he got his permanent home. But, obviously the irony of, especially the tiger thing, that happened on a day when we were promoting responsible pet ownership. So the Bronx Zoo, you know, we do what we do in the park, we do what we do outside the park for animals, but we're also good members of our community. This photograph is from 1917. It's the Red Cross who are working on assembling packages of bandages for the soldiers on the front in World War I. And then you remember the pandemic. You remember when the president sent 250 ambulances here from all around the country. They were staged in Southern Boulevard parking, Crotona parking lot, and for weeks, if not months, all you heard was the sound of ambulances that were going to transport people to the hospital. You know, we didn't know what the pandemic was back then. We didn't know how bad this was going to be. And, you know, our first priority obviously was to take care of the animals. So what we did was we broke our teams up, you know, our essential workers to A and B, because we just didn't know how virulent this was going to be. So we paid people to work one week and then stay home another week. We kept them as separate cohorts. So this was A and B teams at the Bronx Zoo, but we did it for all the zoos. And we also, you know, for the neighborhood, we did COVID testing, set up stations in our parking lots for COVID testing, and also COVID injections. And this is a little video we did to thank everybody. But this is what the Bronx Zoo looked like during COVID. You know, and I think it's really important to emphasize that so many of our people, they had to travel by public transportation to come there. People, we did not know what we were dealing with when COVID started. There were no vaccines. We didn't know. People were dying, right? These people came in every day to take care of these animals. Every day. You know, even if they were scared, even if their family didn't want them to, they came in every day, because they had a responsibility to these animals. And I think it's just, you know, it's just amazing, you know, what dedicated people do. And, we, you know, we weren't alone. It's all around the city, but I don't think people thought of us as essential workers. So, you know, the Bronx Zoo is this place where we invite people in, we allow people to get close to nature, to get close to animals, to appreciate them as individuals, to learn something about them, you know, in small, intimate settings, in larger groups. You know, we have millions of people who come to the zoo every year just to experience animals and nature. And I'm going to close with this last slide. This is a slide of a gibbon that we have in Jungle World. You cannot tell that this photograph was taken in an exhibit in a zoo. And if this is the kind of impact, if by featuring these animals in our zoos and aquariums, and we can feature individual animals, expose people to these individual animals, get people to appreciate them, understand them, be in awe of them, right? Imagine the impact we could have. This is one exhibit in one zoo, in one city, in one country. Imagine the collective impact that zoos could have with all their visitors around the world for the good of species, species conservation, and preservation for the environment. And that is why zoos are relative in the 21st century. Thank you all. I'm sorry I went over a little bit.
So I'm sure you may have some burning questions. Are we going to get room lights up, or are we going to stay like this and checking with Alex in the back? Ah, okay, fantastic. All right. Oh, I have a question right here in the front.
I just want to do a shout out. I'm a wedding planner, and I've done many weddings at the Bronx Zoo. It is the most remarkable guest experience anyone could ever have. It was so honored and proud to work with families there. And if you are planning a family celebration, you must do it at the Bronx Zoo.
Well, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Matter of fact, Kathleen and I got married at the Bronx Zoo. Anybody else?
Oh, we see.
Are you going to tell us how Tiger got into the apartment building?
Yeah, I will. So unfortunately, you know, with the internet, everything's available to everybody, and different states have different wildlife laws, and some are very lax. And so the person who lived in that apartment ordered a lion cub and a tiger cub. When we took the tiger out of there, there was an alligator in the apartment also. So you know, unfortunately, because of the differences in state laws, you can get animals. And everybody in that building knew that cat was in there. I mean, that was not a secret. He got him as a cub, and then the cat grew up and became dangerous and actually bit the person who owned him. And then when that person went to the hospital, he described it as a dog bite, and the doctors knew it wasn't a dog bite, and then they called the authorities.
What is the annual budget of the zoo?
You know, I'm not a numbers guy. It's about the Bronx Zoo. The Bronx Zoo itself is about 80 million, give or take. I mean, all of our, between the Bronx Zoo, the three city zoos, and the aquarium, you know, we're probably closer to 120, 125, something like that.
Hi. Do you guys give a more detailed tour of any of these parks so we can get more information? And also, in Brooklyn, whatever happened to the two beluga whales that were in the aquarium? They're gone now.
Yeah, they went to Mystic.
Okay.
They went to Mystic Aquarium. You know, I mean, one of the things that we need to do, that we have a responsibility to do, is we re-examine what we do on a regular basis, right? And because we're committed to keeping the animals, the species we keep well, I mean, we constantly review things, and as science, you know, we get more science, we get more knowledge, we learn more about species and what they need, you know, it became clear to us that we couldn't keep belugas the way we wanted to at the New York Aquarium, so we sent them to Mystic. I think they both went to Mystic, but they went to other aquariums that have better facilities. And you know, the same thing is true with polar bears. We phased polar bears out. You know, when we took over the three city zoos, and the interesting thing about the three city zoos is tremendous support from the boroughs, from the different boroughs for those zoos. And when we took them over, you know, there were elephants at Prospect Park, there were elephants in Central Park, there were gorillas in Central Park, there were hippos in Prospect Park. And when we went in there, the city asked us to take them over. We said, we'll take them over, but only if we can redesign these and design them. You know, they're small facilities, so we said, we'll redesign them with species that are appropriate for the space that we have, which is why the whole focus of those parks changed, because, you know, as I said, we're committed to keeping the animals and the species that we have well. So we review stuff every year, and if we say that, you know what, either these animals aren't doing well or we just can't, we phase them out. We do the same thing with walrus at the aquarium.
I have a question here, and then I'll come to you. Thank you.
Over here. I'm just wondering about the World of Darkness. What have the animals been up to while that's been closed, and how has the zoo had to confront white nose syndrome in bats? I imagine that's been a concern.
Well, it's less of a concern for the captive populations, but it's an important story for us to be able to tell. So again, that's a great question, actually, and it shows why we want to have a really good bat exhibit again, because it allows us to inform people about white nose syndrome and the challenges that are faced in these species. Well, I wouldn't expect that to be a problem with animals that we kept in the world of darkness, but again, we can use the animals we exhibit to explain challenges that these species are facing in the wild. And the animals that we had there in 2008, either we moved through different parts of the zoo, sent to other zoos, but now we're actually building back those animals so we can have them in that building when it opens again next summer, late next summer.
Hi, I'm Hugh.
I'm sorry, yeah.
Hi, great talk.
Thank you.
I wanted to ask two questions. The first one is like you mentioned like the ties with the community, and I want to ask what ties do you have with other academic institutions, both in Manhattan, but also like university, I mean, like that kind of are interested in studying these animals. And the second one is like you set up these standards. How well do you think institutions, even outside of the US, like zoological institutions, are keeping with these standards, and what should improve the most right now?
So we have, Fordham University is right across the street. We have a long-standing relationship with them. We have a standing relationship with NYU. We have staff members who are on the faculty of these places. Countless field researchers all around the globe. I mean, we have partnerships with a lot of people, with a lot of other zoos and aquarium, and with the research that they do. As far as the standards, yeah, the AZA, the Association of Zoos and Aquariums, of which there are like 230-something members, I think those standards are the most strict. And I can tell you, Natalie said in the beginning, in the intro, that I was on the board of AZA for 7 years, and I was the liaison to the Accreditation Commission, and actually served on the Accreditation Commission for 10 years. I can tell you that those standards are strictly enforced with members, and members have to meet them, and if they don't meet them, they're either tabled or denied. So people take that pretty seriously. I mean, it's a great thing to be able to say that these AZA Zoo members, AZA Zoo and Aquarium members meet this level of standards for keeping animals.
Do zoos still get animals from the wild, or is it all just kind of interzoo?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what the numbers are, but I can tell you, virtually no mammals come from the wild except for animals that are rescued, like the brown bears that we have at the Bronx Zoo are rescue animals. The brown bears that are at Central Park were orphaned. They would have been euthanized if we didn't give them a home. We'll take animals from rehabilitators sometimes, because a lot of times the rehabs can't hold them, so they'll euthanize them. But virtually no mammals are actively collected from the wild. Very few birds, since the wild bird import laws. Some reptiles and amphibians, but mostly not. Some fish in aquariums are still collected from the wild, but
when was
more
the
responsibly.
last wild, like how long ago are you talking before, like the last when wild animals were still brought to zoos?
Oh, I mean, again, I don't know, but I mean, the last, the 60s or 70s, yeah. I mean, and just you can just imagine as people's awareness have increased, then that's a practice that has just been. And the other thing that's happening is governments of countries that have these animals start looking at these animals as natural resources, and they want to control them. So, but because the science, the husbandry, the nutrition, the breeding programs, all the things that I talked about, are as robust as they are. I mean, the animals that you see in the zoos are basically bred in zoos.
We've got time for one or two more questions before we disperse to the bar. Okay.
Hi, thank you so much. Do you have a personal favorite zoo outside of the Bronx Zoo or the New York City zoos and aquariums?
I mean, there's so many, there's so many neat zoos. What tends to draw me to other zoos is, zoos that have different species than we do. Because, I mean, exhibitry standards, are pretty good. But I like to go places where I can see species and animals that are different than what we have. I mean, I think the St. Louis Zoo is a great zoo, San Diego Zoo, Wild Animal Park. I always like the LA Zoo, Woodland Park. I mean, there's a million of them, but I like to go to places and see species that we don't keep. I mean, just because I'm an animal guy, and that's what interests me. Like we were just in Calgary, right? So we got to see musk ox, and we got to see other species that we don't have, which is really cool.
Last question.
Related to that, actually, where would you say are the worst zoos?
The worst zoos are probably in different countries.
Right. Yeah. Can you speak to that at all?
Well, I mean, I think Asia struggles with some zoos. There was some zoos in South America that were pretty rough. But I think zoos in Europe, are pretty okay. But I mean, I think some places that identify themselves as zoos, we would not call them zoos. They would be like, kind of menageries where people would just go to look at animals. I mean, they don't function on the same level as we do. They don't have that mission. But I mean, countries in Asia, I think, struggle.
Hi, I just want to say that was fabulous. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And I just wanted to make a comment because I was just looking this up. That
you can't Google something and then ask me.
Well, no, it's not a question; it's a comment.
It's not fair.
And I hope it's a good comment because
good.
It says the Bronx Zoo is part of the Wildlife Conservation Society,
right?
Which is a 501c3 non-governmental organization.
Right.
So if anyone wants to contribute to all the work that you're doing, I think people should know that they can, and hopefully, excuse me.
I think that's right. I appreciate that. I think that's right. I think we struggle.
Tax deductible, exactly. That's always good.
We struggle to identify ourselves, right? People don't necessarily understand the connection between the Bronx Zoo and WCS. And a lot of people think that the Bronx Zoo is run by the city, which it's not. It's certainly supported by the city, and the city is a great partner for us. But, it's run by the Wildlife Conservation Society, and we are a nonprofit. So, to understand the Bronx Zoo and the Wildlife Conservation Society, you just have to. We started out as a zoo that had a small conservation program, and then through the efforts of dedicated individuals that believed that conservation was really important, we grew that conservation program to be equal in size to the zoo and aquarium side of the mission, right? And then the way I explain it is we started out as a zoo with a conservation program, and over the last 125 years we've evolved into a conservation organization that manages 4 zoos and an aquarium in the city of New York and contributes to field conservation in over 60 countries around the world. So to understand us, you have to understand that evolution.
I think I'm going to co-sign your best friend, the best comment of the night. And you can donate to support that mission. And I'm going to turn it to this gentleman here for the final question.
The other day on the internet, I saw an alligator that was in a zoo in South Africa. The alligator was 125 years old. Do you have any reptiles that live that long in your zoo?
We don't know. We don't know of any that old. And call me skeptical, but I think it's pretty hard to document some of these animals' age depending on where they are and who said it. I mean, there are certainly tortoises alive in zoos in this country that were collected by Townsend, who was the director of the Aquarium in like 1927 or something like that. He was in the 20s. He was very concerned about the effect that the whaling ships were having on the giant tortoise population, because the whalers would go, they would collect tortoises and use them for fresh food. So he mounted an expedition and collected some tortoises that were adult in the 1920s. Those animals are still alive in certain zoos around the country, and the 6 Galapagos tortoises that we have now at the Bronx Zoo are the F1 generation of those animals. That one picture that I showed at the end with Freddie, the Fly River turtle, or the pig-nosed turtle at the reptile house, he is the longest resident of the zoo. He came when?
He's been there 60
years. Yeah, Peter Pritchard was a turtle expert. If you look at Pritchard's Encyclopedia of Turtles or whatever, there's a photograph of Pritchard holding a small pig-nosed turtle in the palm of his hand, and that's Freddie. So Freddie is the longest living resident of the Bronx Zoo, but we're not sure of the age. And stuff with reptiles, it's really hard.
Yeah, I was going to say, we did the video with Abdul, the Aldabra tortoise, but his records show that he was either born between 1898 and 1920, because this is an animal that tends to outlive its human keepers. So having to know those things can be a little difficult. I am getting the cue from the back that we do have to end. I want to thank you immensely. I know I was begging you to come here. So. Thank you for being an amazing ambassador for the Bronx Zoo, and thank you all for joining us this evening.
Thanks very much.
Join us at the bar.